Excellent. Great. So let's start. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Charlotte Sherman. I'm the policy manager here at the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, and I am joined by Conor Gibson, the policy manager here at the Fundraising Regulator, who will be talking about the final consultation that they are launching following a 3-year review of the Code of Fundraising Practice. So before I pass over to Conor, I'm just going to give you a little bit of housekeeping. So as you can see, Conor will be doing a presentation. If you would like to use the closed captioning, all you need to do is click the closed captioning button at the bottom of your screen. If it hasn't appeared, then you should just click the 3 dots that says more, and the CC captions is the option at the very top of the box. Then the next thing to know is that we will be taking questions after the session. So if you have any questions, if you could share them in the Q&A box. So once again, at the bottom of your screen, you will see that there is a button that says Q&A and a little question mark. If you click that and type your question in there, it just means that we've got all the questions in one place. If you have any other queries or you just want to say hello and where you're from today, then feel free to pop that in the chat and myself or Vicky will respond to you. And we've got the first question already. Will the recording be shared later? I believe it will be. So if you watch this space, you should get an email afterwards. Great. And with that, I will hand over to Conor. Over to you, Conor.
Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks, everybody, for coming along to hear about the code review. I'm going to take you through what we've done so far, and then what we're currently doing with the consultation, and then what will actually happen next. So you should get a good picture of what's been happening since about 2 years ago, autumn 2022, when we kicked things off. So first off, talk about why we're reviewing the code in the first place. It's the first time we've fully reviewed the code since October 2019, and that last review was actually quite a generalist review. It was clarifying information, streamlining it a bit, but it didn't really add anything new or make any significant changes to what the previous version of the code had contained. And so we decided that we needed to reflect a lot of stuff that's changed since October 2019. There's been technological changes, a lot more use of contactless payment systems, online fundraising tools, for example. We want to make sure that the code reflects that appropriately. There's been big changes in legislation. A lot of you will know, obviously, the Charities Act, changes to lotteries, changes to GDPR. The current version of the code references those, and those references are not necessarily fully up to date and accurate because they haven't been reviewed since October 2019. There's been some changes in the behavior of fundraisers and society in general. Some of them have just been because of emerging technology, people becoming more comfortable using convenience giving tools, micro donations and top ups at supermarkets becoming a more common thing, but also the unavoidable impact of COVID, which initially had a big impact on the number of, say, remote fundraising events that people were taking place in. People are a lot more comfortable with that. People often expect there to be a remote attendance option for events now as well. And also in terms of people's working patterns, whereas in the past, if you were to knock on someone's door during the business day and they were probably available to talk, but now there's the risk that you could be interrupting somebody in a work meeting. You need to be more considerate of things like that. So there's been big changes in the last 5 years that we're all obviously aware of, and that we want to make sure that the code is relevant to all those circumstances. So as I mentioned, we kicked things off in autumn of 2022. It was a very exhaustive process that we've been doing. I joined in February 2023 when this had already started, but we had an initial call for information when we asked people what things they think could be improved in the code, what should be added, what should be removed. Then we had a subsequent consultation on our proposals, which some of you may have been here around about this time last year whenever I spoke about that. Then in light of all the feedback that we got, we analyzed those responses and we drafted a new code, which we're now consulting on, and which is what I'm going to focus on primarily today. It launched on the 3rd of September and it's running until the 1st of November. It's a slightly truncated version of the consultation. Last time we had 12, 13 weeks. This time we're talking 8 to 9 weeks, but that's because it's a lot more focused on here are the new rules and here's what do you think about how we've presented this information. Once that's all concluded, we'll then be preparing to launch the new code in early 2025, and I'll discuss that in detail towards the end of this presentation. Sorry. So the new draft of the code is based on all the feedback that we've received from the exercises that I've just talked about, from the day-to-day regulatory work we do, from the committees that we consult with, from the work that we do with sector bodies and other regulators as well. And through that, we've developed a new approach to the code, which is more principles based in how the rules are presented. We have significantly revised how we provide information about rules where we are not the lead regulator. I'll be going into all these in detail. We've created some new rules to fill in gaps and clarify points, and we've also amended some of the existing rules to make sure that they cover the range of scenarios where they should apply. We've also tried to focus a lot on improving the accessibility and clarity of the code. I understand that most of you here today, if you're connected with CIOF, you're probably full-time or very invested fundraisers who probably know the existing code very well, but we need to be aware that the code has to be digestible, accessible, and understandable to all sorts of philanthropic and benevolent fundraisers, some of whom it might be the very first time they've ever done this activity, and they need to understand what's expected of them. So the consultation itself, as I mentioned, the code is a lot shorter than it was than the 2019 version, and that's why we're hoping that you can provide your insights and responses based on the new rules that we put together. There are 70% fewer rules than in the existing code. A lot of this is because we've removed rules which were linked to other regulators, and the old code had a lot of rules that covered topics like gifted, GDPR, that was useful information for fundraisers to know, but we didn't want to give the impression that we would be the body that somebody would go to if they received a complaint about it and if they wanted a matter addressed. And yeah, it's almost half the length in terms of words. So hopefully you'll be able to read through and digest the consultation and provide your responses without it being a huge commitment on the part of the respondents. To help people out who are already familiar with the code, we've got a table of changes. If you're used to doing events fundraising and always referring to Rule 11.3.1, and you wonder what's happened to Rule 11.3.1, you can refer to the table of changes and it'll tell you if that rule's been removed or amended or replaced by another rule. And we've also revised our glossary, because part of making the information more concise is by not tying so many of our definitions to legal definitions of commercial participators, professional fundraisers. And so the big example would be that we're now using the term fundraising partners to capture individuals and organizations who are you're working with on fundraising activity where, for example, you may need a written agreement or they may be subject to solicitation statement requirements. And so we wanted to try and present that information in a more kind of plain English manner, rather than tying it so much to the terminology and legislation. So the principles-based rules, the intention is that they would provide a framework that can be applied to a range of different scenarios. It doesn't make them completely future-proof, but it does mean that as new approaches emerge, you can apply the principle to that new approach. That will hopefully make it easier for existing fundraisers, existing users of the code to understand where the expectations will apply. in those new scenarios, but also make it easier and more digestible for newer users. We don't want to have a whole list of prescriptive rules of you must do this, you must do this, you must do this, with the risk of giving the impression that anything beyond those listed prescriptions is permitted. That creates a risk for us that we're not covering all the areas because just simply because we haven't thought of them. But we do provide examples in the principles-based rules of things that you're always expected to do, or ways in which you can meet that expectation, or things that which are always prohibited. That means it's useful for fundraisers themselves to understand what is and is not permitted, and also if a potential donor or member of the public is looking at the code and is concerned about fundraising behavior, they can understand the type of thing that meets or doesn't meet that principles-based standard. It is worth saying, though, that our intention is that all the existing protections for the public, for existing and potential donors, have been retained within the code despite the significant streamlining. So we're not taking anything away from people. In fact, in some instances, we're strengthening the scope of where these rules can apply. Probably the easiest way to contextualize this is by giving you an example. And so we have an example here where in the current code, there are 4 rules that appear in 3 different places in 2 different sections of the code that essentially require you to not put too much pressure on people to donate, not to be overly intrusive. And so we've taken those 4 rules and put them into a new principles-based rule that requires that fundraisers take all reasonable steps to ensure fundraising is conducted in a way that reflects positively on fundraising in general, and then listing examples of things that are not permitted or that are expected. For example, not unreasonably intruding on privacy, placing undue pressure to donate, or being unreasonably persistent in your approach, and also accepting a request to end an interaction. We consider that this is useful because it shows that it applies across a whole range of fundraising contexts. The current rule 8.4.1 only applies specifically to door-to-door fundraising, when actually it's still essentially the same idea of not trying to continue to talk to somebody about fundraising if they've indicated that they don't want to. It's, as I mentioned, these are sort of non-exhaustive examples. So there are other ways in which fundraising activity could fail to reflect positively on fundraising in general, but we're just providing these as indicative examples with the opportunity to explore further as required. It's probably worth pointing out with this specific example, you see the existing rule 1.1.2 at the top on the left-hand side requires that fundraisers must be polite at all times. We considered that that was actually not a reasonable standard to set and could place fundraisers in a difficult position when it comes to, for example, responding to harassment or inappropriate language from a potential donor. And so we simply require that fundraisers behave in a way that reflects positively on fundraising, and at times that might be to take an appropriate response to someone else's inappropriate behavior rather than to remain polite at all times. So we have considered aspects of that, and you'll see that reflected in some of the other rules in the revised code. A big thing for understanding the principles-based rules is the code compliance guides that we've included in the consultation alongside the redrafted code. These are setting out how an organization can demonstrate that they've complied with the principles-based rule. We recognize that there's a whole range of ways in which you can actually meet the principles-based rules. So these code compliance guides, they're guidelines, they're not checklists. There isn't an expectation that you would do everything in the code compliance guide. It's more, these are ways that you can show that you've complied. And if we were to conduct investigations, we would refer to that and say, well, have you done this? Have you done that? How did you decide whether to do this or whether to do that? But we recognize that there are approaches that go beyond what's laid out in the code compliance guides. But we felt that it was useful to, sorry, let you know about the main topics that will affect a lot of aspects of fundraising. So the three topics that are covered are documenting decisions, which is very important when the fundraising regulator is looking into a complaint to say, well, how did you reach that decision? Hopefully you have a record of it. It's very good for keeping track of risk to reputation in a certain fundraising approach, risks of conflict of interest, demonstrating that you've shown due consideration to the issues or taken all reasonable steps. That's a good way that you can help show us that you've done what's expected of you. Due diligence, as I mentioned, reputation, conflict of interest. Have you been checking that your fundraising partners are the right people to work with, and how have you done those checks? And then tied to that, monitoring, which is currently covered in part in section 7.3 of the code, but we've felt that it was better to provide more detail, more context, and also really emphasize the point that it will be dependent on the nature of the relationship, how much you need to monitor, what's expected, and open to the idea that there are other monitoring approaches that we haven't included in there that could be completely compliant, but it's just a case of setting out some initial guidelines for you to follow rather than saying you must always monitor in this way. There'll be more of these to follow as well, hopefully before the implementation of the new code, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. As I've alluded to a few times, we've revised how the code presents information where the fundraising regulator is not the lead regulator. We think it is useful for fundraisers to be aware that there are laws that apply to gift aid, there are laws that apply to gambling, there are laws that apply to data protection, but we don't want to give the impression that the fundraising regulator is the place to come to get all the up-to-date information that you need to understand GDPR. We also don't want to give the impression that we would investigate a complex case of if an organization is accused of breaching GDPR in their fundraising activity, that is a matter for the Information Commissioner's Office to deal with. And if we have rules in our code that specifically reference GDPR, that could cause confusion, and that could wrongly give the impression that the fundraising regulator is in a position to address those matters. And as mentioned there on the slide, there is also the big risk that that information can become out of date. Since 2019, there's been significant changes to GDPR, significant changes to lotteries and gambling regulations, and those are not currently reflected. And if we give the false impression that everything you need to know is in the code about every aspect of fundraising, then there's a risk of some users not looking further, not looking into what the ICO currently says on this issue, what HMRC currently says on gift aid, because they'll just think, well, it says this in the code. So by taking these rules out, by replacing them with signposting and direction to the lead regulator, we can make sure that information is more up to date, and also it allows us to not have to wait for a full consultation period to update it. Again, as with principles-based rules, probably easiest to just show you an example of this. So currently, the code references gift aid in 4 different rules with some links to further guidance. This is helpful, it's useful, it's good for organizations to know how gift aid works and where to find out more information about it, but we don't want to give the impression that we're the body that will adjudicate on gift aid. Also, this is close to 300 words in the current code, whereas in the redrafted code, we've trimmed this down to about 120 words that explain what gift aid is, that highlight that HMRC is the lead body to cover this, and then direct the reader to where they can find those resources. And we can update those resources a lot more flexibly if they don't sit within number rules that have the impression that we'll adjudicate on it. So that's really the hope there. I've talked a lot about taking things out. We've also added some things into the code. There are new rules on unstaffed collections, which I'll cover in more detail on the next slide. That's the term that we've come up with for collection methods, fundraising methods, where there's only one-way communication. The donor can't ask a question of the fundraiser. The donor can't get any kind of feedback on how the donation's happening. So they need to understand as clearly as possible what they're donating to. We've streamlined the rules on fundraising platforms, focusing a lot on our guidance. We contacted the platforms directly to get perspectives from them about that. We have a new rule on how to engage with the fundraising regulator, which is quite a commonplace rule for self-regulators, just to make sure that we are not held up in our investigations by people who are not engaging with us appropriately, and that we can take steps that we need to address those matters. And we've amended the rules on paying fundraisers. This was something that came up in the market inquiry a lot, that the presentation of rules on paying fundraisers is unreasonably restrictive in the current code. So the new approach, it accepts that performance-based pay may be an appropriate way to pay fundraisers who are doing certain work, but that it needs to align with the values of the charitable institution. That's all reflected in the market inquiry that we conducted last year, so it shouldn't be too new to you. So just a bit more detail on the unstaffed collections. There's some of the examples there. It does also cover static collection sites and charity bags. The focus is on providing the baseline of information that donors need to make an informed decision. Sorry, and setting a level playing field. So if there are two charity collection bins side by side, that both of them will clearly explain what is going to happen to the donation. Is it going to our recycling centre, where then there'll be a contribution through a commercial participation arrangement with a processing company, or is it a donation that's going straight to, in the first instance, a charity shop to be sold, just so that people can understand what is happening with their donations and how they're going to be used. Hopefully also this will mean that it's useful in emerging contexts. If new payment methods approach, if new fundraising approaches emerge, then we'll be able to apply the expectations in the unstaffed collections rules to those contexts. So as we get towards here, as I mentioned before, we want to improve accessibility and clarity of the code. We're signposting a lot more to current guidance. We're producing more guidance as well that will accompany the relaunch code, the redrafted code as it launches. We want to improve how the information is presented on our website. A major thing will be keyword searches. So when the rules are reorganized, although there's some sections related to specific methods, you'll be able to search the name of the method and find all the rules that would apply or that reference that. We're hoping that the way that we've put together the code, particularly based on insights from our legal review, will clarify who is responsible for actually meeting each expectation. When is it the responsibility of the organization? When is it the responsibility of the fundraising partner? When is it the responsibility of the fundraising platform? Trying to clarify that, because that could sometimes get a little messy in the current code with the structures that we used within that and the presentation of the rules. So we've kept that in mind, and we do want to think about making sure that the code is clear and understandable to as wide an audience as possible, because there will be people who are using the code and reading the code and hoping to abide by the code, who are part-time trustees who are organizing a fundraising event for the very first time, and they want to understand exactly what they need to do. So the consultation itself opened a few weeks ago on the 3rd of September and runs for about 5 more weeks until the 1st of November. As with the last consultation, digital first approach, we're trying to make the information as easy to digest and access as possible. You can go straight to the sections that are relevant to you. You can comment on as many or as few of the new rules as apply to you. If you want to fill in the events section one day and submit it, and then come back a week later and do the payroll giving section, you're completely free to do that. And we've also included the supporting documents in the online format, which we consider is one of the advantages of using the online format, is that we can provide a wider range of information in different formats, rather than have a really quite substantial, 18,000 word document that you have to work your way through to find the bits that are most relevant to you. The table of changes that I've already mentioned is presented within the supporting documentation, and it's linked to each section. So if you're in section 2 and you want to see what the old section 2 used to say, you can go straight to there on the table of changes and see how the old rules or the current rules map onto the new rules. Hopefully quite a few of you will have had a look already since it launched 3 weeks ago, but this is what it looks like. You've got the landing page there with the instructions and supporting documents, and then each individual section you can click on independently, answer as many or as few questions as are relevant to you, and save and return or submit straight away. We've had people sending through responses since the launch, so there are obviously people who are quite keen to just have their say, hit submit, and be done with it. What will happen next? So as Charlotte mentioned, this is the last chance for you to have your say on this redrafted code. So if you can really take that opportunity and let us know, give us your insights, say if you have concerns or suggestions or whatever it is about specific rules, and we can make sure that your response is linked to the rule you're talking about, so we know exactly what it is that you're saying. Then after the consultation closes, we'll be analysing the responses and making any amendments that are necessary, taking it to our boards and committees for approval. Just for those who aren't aware, our board and our committees have fundraising practitioners represented, so there will be insights from people who do on-the-ground fundraising. Also, the Chartered Institute is present at our committee meetings as well, so they'll be able to raise concerns, keep track of things. It's not just a matter of the door is closed, there's no more insights from fundraisers at that point. Then hopefully once everything is approved by, early 2025, we're saying maybe April, we can't be sure, we'll be able to launch the new code. It'll have been amended from the consultation responses. It'll have been had another legal review to make sure everything's relevant, and we'll put it out there. But we won't be immediately saying, here's the new rules, how are you abiding by them? There'll be a 6-month implementation period, which will allow organizations to bring their practices into line with the new code. So you've got a pretty good indication of what the new code is going to say. We don't think there's going to be substantial changes between now and the launch, but the code that we launch is the one that we'll be asking you to bring your processes in line with. And to support that during the implementation period, we're going to do some wider engagement with the sector and with the public as well, so they're aware of what the expectations are. We're going to provide some more guidance on other topics. The 3 pieces of code compliance guides that we included in the consultation will be providing possibly some more along those lines, but also some general guidance topics. And during the 6-month implementation period, we will be limiting the investigations that we conduct. We will still be looking into, high priority issues and complaints about fundraising practice, particularly if it is a practice that would still be a problem under the new code. But we're going to be prioritizing our focus on the new code as we move towards it ahead of the implementation, maybe around about this time next year, if all things go to plan. And from that point forward, all our investigations will be based on the principles-based rules and the new approach that we've laid out in the consultation documents. So hopefully, a little more than 20 minutes, sorry about that, but hopefully that's given you a decent insight of what's involved. I see that there's been activity on the chat, so if I'm probably going to hand over to Charlotte now, who will have been looking through the comments and questions, and we can move on to that.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, just as we get everybody warmed up and thinking about the questions they want to ask, I was curious about the guidance. So you started developing guidance. My understanding is that the first 3 that have been released are the first of several to come. Could you tell us a bit more about kind of what your plans are for using kind of code compliance guidance in conjunction with the code?
So in terms of the code compliance guidance, that's very specific in that it's focused on, here's how you meet these new rules, but also we're aware that we have taken a lot of stuff out of the code. The easiest example would be the events section. There's a lot of very prescriptive rules in the events section, rules that cover making sure people don't break traffic laws or who's responsible for insurance. And we think that's useful for people to know who are running events, but it's not necessarily an aspect that should exist within our code. So we are looking at producing some new guidance that's a bit more sort of instructional on how to run an event effectively, how to use social media effectively. There's topics like that that we're currently working on that we're hoping that we'll be in a place to implement those or publicize those in the implementation period. So you'll have a good understanding of this is how you run an event responsibly, but also there are these rules that apply, and this is how the rules will fit into those guidelines.
Excellent, thank you. And then the next question here I've got is from Leah. When it comes to public fundraising, some of the concerns raised most often by practitioners have been, one, subcontracting, and two, ads to recruit face-to-face fundraisers, where, for example, some do not match the real treatment of fundraisers and end up affecting the reputation of the sector negatively, as well as affecting recruitment for everyone else. Has anything been added to the code to regulate both subcontracting and recruitment ads?
That's one that hasn't been raised previously. I haven't seen that within the consultation responses or the call for information that we've had so far. So this is sort of a new topic that's coming up to me. But I would say that the primary focus of the fundraising regulator is on fundraising activity, and recruiting people for fundraising is somewhat separate. I think it's an interesting area, and it might be something that we would look into in other contexts, as we did, with the market inquiry, where we looked into training of fundraisers and things like that. But it's not really something that would be covered by the code generally, although it is obviously, I can understand that the Chartered Institute, I'm sure, is very interested in that topic, and it could be something that we could look into together, but it's not really something that would be captured by the code.
Absolutely. And yeah, building on that, I was going to say to you, Leah, I think we're working at the moment on some guidance on face-to-face fundraising. So this is definitely something I'll pop my email in the chat, and either you or me or my boss, Claire, can all have a chat about it, because it's definitely an interesting topic. And now moving swiftly on to a slightly different one here from Jay. The current code has noted which parts apply to Scotland and split out to where it applies. Will this still remain so it is clear for bodies based in Scotland?
So yeah, that was an aspect that I didn't actually go into on the accessibility, but one thing we are considering is how we present that information within, drop-down menus and things like that within the code itself. But a large part of what is captured in the current code in Scotland do this, in Northern Ireland do this, is tied directly to legislation. So that information will be available and visible, but it'll be a lot more about signposting than it will be about saying, in Scotland, this is the rule, in England and Wales, this is the rule. Because where possible, we've tried to set standard expectations, and then if there's an additional expectation in Scotland because the law is different in Scotland, we explain separate from the rule, but still within the code. In Scotland, there's a legal requirement to do this, this, and this. We had quite a few people ask, so the current code approach, if you're wondering what those sorts of rules are being taken out, they have the word must in bold in the current code, because that indicates that they're tied to legislation. And a lot of people said, well, what's the legislation this is tied to as well? And so we've tried to, as much as possible, not just say the law in Scotland says you must do this. It will say under this law in Scotland, these are the expectations that apply. So by taking it out of the framework of a rule, a numbered rule that just says you must or you must not do this, we can also provide you more useful context. But for the most part, the regional variations are because of legislation rather than because of kind of expectations on practice. So we can generally set principle-based rules that would apply across all the regions.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And now the next one is from Hannah. The code includes the rules in italics, but there is also a lot of other text and commentary included, e.g. to explain the legal position. Will the fundraising regulator also adjudicate on those sections or just the actual code sections? And in brackets, in italics.
So I presume from that Hannah's been looking at the actual consultation, which is good because that's the format that we've gone with. That was part of what we did to differentiate it, to show that the rules, if it's got a three-part number beside it and it's like that, then that's a rule that we'll adjudicate on. The rest of it is contextual information, useful insights and directions to lead regulators, information on the law. The example I gave you of the gift aid one, that is, we would never opine on, adjudicate on gift aid. We think it's useful to have a brief explanation of what gift aid is, and so that appears as plain text within the new code rather than in the current code where there are 4 different numbered rules that reference gift aid. We instead have taken those out and replaced them with a brief explanation of gift aid and a direction to the lead regulator. But we want to be as clear as possible that if it's in a rule with a number beside it, that's for us to deal with, and there's still going to be some other information in the code that's just useful context and direction to where you can find more information.
Excellent, thank you. And then the next one we've got is from Sanjivan from the Turner Contemporary. Our charity has a small in-house development team who lead fundraising. We work with freelancers on specific initiatives. What are the requirements in relation to these freelancers in the new code, e.g. CIOF membership and amended contracts, training, etc.?
Well, we don't set any expectation on freelancers, professional fundraisers being CIOF members. So I mean that could be one for Charlotte to go into on that. But generally, it's that the charitable institution with the trustees as the top level responsibility have to ensure that the fundraising is legal, open, honest, and respectful, and that it is. That might mean that as part of your contracts with those people, you would explain what standards are you want them to meet, or what the solicitation statements are you want them to set out, or anything like that. But it would be very similar to the expectations laid out in section 7 of the current code, and which we've recently explained in a more concise manner in some new guidance on professional fundraisers and commercial participators. They will be essentially the same, but they'll be framed slightly differently. But the focus is really that if you are enlisting somebody to do fundraising on your behalf, particularly if that person is getting paid for it, then they will be expected to meet certain standards and they'll be laid out. So mostly what is in section 7 of the current code and section 7 of the revised code and within the guidance there. Slightly different if those people are working voluntarily for you, but yeah, if you're enlisting people to do that work, then they're going to be subject to the code, and there'll be certain expectations that, as the sort of ultimate responsibility of the charitable institution, is that you've documented that properly, that you've put things in contracts, that you've explained how you're going to check that they're doing their work right, so that the fundraising is responsible.
Excellent, thank you. And then next one from an anonymous attendee. Could you give any more information about the monitoring compliance guidance and what it will cover?
So it's there, it's out there, you can read it yourself, but it essentially is inspired in part by what is in section 7.3 of the current code, which was the only time that we really did that in the current code, but we thought it would be useful to do it in more detail. And it says, ways in which you can monitor fundraising include, and then lists a number of mechanisms you can, mystery shoppers or attending training, all things like that. As I mentioned, I think in the presentation as well, the idea is that there are lots of ways to monitor effectively, and these are examples of ways in which you can monitor effectively, rather than this is best practice or you must always do these things. And it will be dependent on the nature of the relationship, the scale of the work that's being done. So yeah, certainly if you read that, it's not completely finalized. These are sort of examples that we thought were very useful to include within the code consultation document. So we haven't completely locked down what the monitoring code compliance guide will say, but it's there for you to read. It's in the supporting documents section, and there's an option to comment on it. So if you have suggestions or thoughts on that, then we'd be very happy to hear them.
Excellent. And then another anonymous one. With the new streamlined code, will there be potential for fundraising consultants and consultancies, i.e. independent of a charity, fundraising for multiple clients who are charities, to have their contracts and practices assessed and be able to show a fundraising regulator quality or compliance mark? It is interesting.
This is something that came up in the market inquiry as well into subcontracting, which happened late last year. At the minute, there isn't a plan to sort of offer a trust mark or a seal of approval. I understand that several years ago there was some sort of active monitoring and assessment done by the institute or in its previous form, but it's not currently part of the plan for us to offer a kind of trust mark or a seal on contractors in that way. But it's possible that could happen. I mean, at the minute, our big focus is on getting the new code out, so we'll have a lot of time for other aspects of policy once the new code is launched.
And on subcontracting, we've got a couple here on subcontracting. So I might just do them together. So the first is just, does the glossary section include a clear definition of subcontracting? And then we've got another one here, which is from Natalie. Primary agencies that rely solely on subcontractors do not employ their own fundraisers. Is this something that will be looked at within the market inquiry? Can these practices be covered by the regulator? So slightly different. One's more of a kind of how's subcontracting change within the glossary, and the others maybe looking more at a kind of update around the market inquiry.
So although I've quite loosely used and freely used the term subcontracting, it doesn't really appear. It isn't really a term that we use within the code itself, and so it's not really covered in the glossary. But in the wider, there's context in which it applies. Like whenever you are enlisting a fundraising partner, that's essentially subcontracting work, and we've tried to improve with the help from the charity lawyers who've been reviewing the work that we've been doing, making sure it's clear who is responsible for what aspect of the code, in particular in section 7 on the subcontracting topic. The wider question about the market inquiry, I'm not really in a position to answer that. I've not been intimately involved. I attended one of the sessions, so unfortunately I can't really go into the detail on that at the minute. We're focusing more on the code itself at the moment.
Absolutely. And so then actually this brings us back on to the code and some of the kind of plans for guidance. An anonymous attendee's asked, will the new guidance be looking to cover more emerging digital fundraising practices, such as the use of AI?
That's an interesting one. It's come up a few times. It came up in the call for information in November 2022. It came up in the first consultation last year. What we have done is that we have been engaging with organizations, both charities and sort of agencies that use AI to find out what the state of play is. But at the moment, we're not in a position to provide meaningful, specific guidance focused on AI. A lot of the principles about openness and transparency and ensuring that information is accurate, that if you make a claim about where money is going to go, that you can support that claim, will apply. Those principles will apply to AI, but we're not really in a position at the minute to produce something meaningful in terms of guidance on AI, but we are keeping track of wider things. We're exploring. I know it's not the most emerging issue, but particularly post-COVID, things like the use of streaming and social media influencers trying to clarify where responsibilities lie when somebody is or isn't an on behalf of volunteer fundraiser. But yeah, the tricky thing with the emerging topics is that we may not always have enough of an insight to provide it. So we might find that we actually put out different formats of information on those topics rather than structured full guidance. We might just say have a sort of news article or a blog or something explaining here's how AI works. I think probably a good example is there was some changes a few years ago, I think 3 years ago, on insights into how secondary purposes are explained, and we put out an article on the website explaining here's how secondary purposes work and here's what we expect. We didn't produce a full piece of guidance. We didn't have this as a supplement to the code, but we put something out there for the sector to understand what this emerging issue means. The market inquiry is another one as well. The subcontracting issues were coming up. We had not produced a detailed piece of guidance on subcontracting, but we have produced a lot of contextual information, some key findings and recommendations from the market inquiry. So we will probably be taking a more flexible approach to the emerging issues as they emerge.
Excellent, thank you. And yeah, I'll just follow up as well on the AI topic. So we have been talking to members about kind of what applications they're using. So if people are interested in hearing more about it, both, we've got events that are going on that will be looking at it, particularly some of the group events, but then also more widely, we're looking at kind of strategically, what does this mean for the sector and how are things going to be changing as a result of it? So it's still early conversations with us as well. I think we're still developing what exactly it is that we're going to be putting out to support charities, but we kind of recognize that it's on the radar and it's something that needs to be addressed. And with that, we have another question, and this is about, we're going to be quoting some of the quotes. So Conor, I hope you can remember the code completely off by heart here.
Okay.
In this section, 8.4.3, you must ensure fundraisers have the appropriate official materials and any necessary formal authorization to carry out their fundraising. You must also keep a record of the issuing and return of your fundraising materials. For the return of fundraising materials, does this refer to badges, authorization material, for example, the letter of authority, or does it refer to everything that a fundraiser has been given that relates to the charity, for example, leaflets and marketing material?
So that's I believe that is clarified somewhat in the glossary, but just to be sure, and there's the option for you to comment on that specific rule within the consultation if you think it's not clear enough. That rule had initially been proposed to remove the expectation in the current rule, and then it was pointed out that that is a important mechanism for fraud prevention. Obviously, you don't want people having tabards with your charity branding on it walking around who shouldn't have it. So the intention is that that rule would cover wider materials to support fraud prevention, because that has been something that's come up quite a bit over the last few years of people inappropriately using fundraising materials. And it is just a kind of, it's a risk mitigation mechanism, is that you keep track of what goes out and what comes back in. And that's kind of the intention within that rule, is that it would be, obviously you don't want somebody taking your letter of authority as well, but then there's other aspects. There's a wider aspect to it. And the issue was that the current code was not clear enough on that. The current code could have just been interpreted to say, don't leave a load of litter around with your, don't leave lots of stickers around with your charity's branding on it, because it doesn't look good for the charity, when actually the purpose is more on ensuring that people can't get hold of those fundraising materials to use them inappropriately.
Excellent, thank you. So then, we've got quite a few more still to go and 10 minutes left. So anyone else, make sure you get your questions in. Once again, anonymous attendee, can you give us any more further guidance on pay? Is there I think there's emphasis in potentially moving away from self-employed fundraisers?
We, as I mentioned briefly, we've amended how the rules on paying fundraisers are presented. The current wording talks about how it's you should avoid using commission, and we don't use the word commission anymore. We talk about performance-related pay. The big suggestion of the market inquiry was that, or the big finding was that you can use these tools appropriately. It's just that you need to make sure that you use them appropriately, and hopefully you would use them in a way that aligns with the values of the organization as well. So no, we're not restricting any approach, but we do ask that there's proper consideration for how that approach fits, what the outcome is, what that means for the people who are actually doing the fundraising work, and how that aligns with the broader values of the organization. We probably, it would be unreasonable, and we would probably face a judicial review if we said this completely legal approach is not permitted under our code. And so we're instead placing the emphasis on being considerate of the impact of that, just as organizations are considering their environmental impact or who they want to work with based on reputation. It's another facet, but this facet is particularly tied to fundraising practice and people who are public representatives of your organization, and so we think it's important to emphasize that.
Excellent, thank you. And now, from the Borneo Nature Foundation. Hi, I am new to the fundraising code and I am tasked with creating a checklist for our charity. Should I wait for the new code, or is there a simple version to work with as you transition from 2019 code to the new one?
In the long run, the new code is going to be what you'll want to focus on. For activity that is going on at the moment, it is worth looking at the individual sections and understanding exactly what the rules say. If we were to, we haven't launched the new code yet, we're still investigating issues under the current code. So it is worth looking into that, reading through the guidance on and the key topics that we have, because that will still apply. That will be refreshed as well ahead of the new consultation. And then during the implementation period, so the middle of next year, we will be having some more sessions and some more engagement activity that will help with that. But you're in the unfortunate position of being landed in the middle of this, and so I would say get a good understanding of the new code. It's a lot shorter. It's probably going to be very similar to what the final published code looks like, but when it comes to the detail, it will be worth looking at the existing code. And as a newcomer to the fundraising practice in the UK, there's a lot of information in there that is useful but isn't really rules as well, like the directions to other pieces of legislation, and there's a lot more detail in the current code, which is actually a thing that you may find useful in terms of getting your head around how these things work.
Thank you. Now, once again, just from Borneo Nature Foundation, great. Is there a copy of the new code? Yes. So if you go on the Fundraising Regulator's website to the consultation, that's where the full code is, is published at the moment. And Conor will just, sorry, I'm cutting you off and answering for you there, Conor.
That's fine, yeah.
You've been doing a lot of these and you might just need a moment to take a glass of water. Two that I'm going to be merging very, very quickly right before we end, both on webinars and training. So the first is from Laura Perrat from the National Trails UK. So she's asked, will you be delivering any webinars on or training about the new code, specifically for charity trustees? And Gillian has asked, will the webinars on the training section of the website be updated? So thematically very similar, although looking at slightly different areas of training.
Yes, we plan to update the webinars. Yes, we're going to try and use that as a kind of one-to-many approach to try and get the information out there and have it in a easily digestible format. We want to, there'll probably be quite light touch things. It'll be, me or one of my colleagues talking over a PowerPoint presentation, but we are hoping that the focus will be on, this is what the new code says. So we're not going to say, we used to have these rules on events and now we've got these rules on events. We're going to say, these are the rules on events. This is what you need to know about events. This is what you need to know about the responsibilities of people who govern charitable institutions. We hadn't specifically thought about a wrap up of the new code just for trustees, but essentially a lot of these things that we're planning will be relevant to trustees, and you'll be able to direct them to the section 2 of the code that outlines what the responsibilities are of those who govern charitable institutions. And so that's what we're hoping to do. We're also going to do hopefully some engagement with the types of people who don't already know about the code. So if you're at this session, you were quite possibly at the session I did this time last year as well, and you know what the code is and you know what the code's going to end up looking like, but there's going to be a whole audience out there that we want to reach who aren't familiar with the code. So there will be some kind of beginner's guide to the code type resources, which will be a useful point of direction for trustees. That's something that's come up a few times. Is we've had fundraisers saying we're very, very invested in appropriate fundraising practice, but we're not getting the backing from our trustees, and how can we communicate that to them? And so by directing them to those training resources could be a useful starting point. Also, we have tried to emphasize and clarify where the responsibilities lie for certain expectations. And obviously, in a lot of scenarios, ultimate responsibility does lie with the governing body of the charitable institution. And so making that as clear as possible to your trustees will hopefully get them to understand what their responsibilities are.
Excellent, thank you. And now last question, and this kind of circles back to the fundraising materials question we were talking about earlier. So it said, would event shirts that say I am running for X be expected to be returned? These are often seen as memento, but feasibly could have the same effect of misleading someone if worn beyond the event. So I think it's just more thinking more about what the parameters of those fundraising materials are.
That's an interesting question. I would assume no, but it's also worth raising that in the consultation to say, could this be clarified? The arguably that's kind of their participation materials rather than fundraising materials. But if it's not clear enough in the code, or if those questions remain, then perhaps we can provide clearer definitions or provide some supplementary information to cover that. But yeah, like the example I used of, the like tabards or windbreakers or things like that that people wear whilst they're doing fundraising activity, or indeed identity badges, that's more straightforward than a t-shirt that you or a bib that you wear at an event. But I think that's certainly worth raising alongside those rules, and then we can think about how we can make it as clear as possible, either within the code itself, within the glossary, or within supporting materials.
And we have someone has snuck in and asked one more question about one of the standards with 2 minutes to go. So
Okay.
the new wording of 5.1.1, you must tell in aid of fundraisers how they can fundraise legally and safely. There are an incalculable number of ways in which someone could come to a charity and say to them, I'm going to fundraise for you by doing this, e.g. sports would walk, run, bungee jump. A charity is supposed to outline how they do all of these things legally and safely.
Well, as with a lot of this, there's lots of different ways to do it. There isn't a single approach that we don't want to be prescriptive about. This is the only way that you can do it, and this is not always an area where we're going to get a lot of. It might be an aspect of something we're investigating, but it's unlikely we're going to investigate that specific element of that rule. But essentially, it's about maybe having some information on your website saying, if you're fundraising in aid of, please be aware of this aspect of the code, or please be aware that the code exists, things like that. It's ensuring that you've covered that off. There's an expectation already that on behalf of fundraisers are shown how to fundraise legally and responsibly. And it was considered from the insights that we had through all our information gathering that it's probably reasonable, in the event that that you're aware of an native fundraiser, that you at least give them a nudge towards, by the way, there's these rules, make sure you're aware of them, rather than that you actually monitor what they're doing. Then they would probably no longer be a native fundraiser. We don't want to put heavy expectations on how you address every single native fundraiser. Most of these rules that apply to native fundraisers are, should you happen to find out about a native fundraiser, here's what you should do.
Excellent. Well, with that, we really do need to close. I was just going to say, so just to clarify, what you mean when you say fundraise legally and safely, it's not necessarily how to legally bungee jump, it's how you actually go about your fundraising.
Yeah, fundraising activity, yeah.
I think that's what this question was
yeah.
getting at. Brilliant. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I'm going to let everybody go. I do normally do a little bit of a quick wrap up, and instead I'm just going to make it a was going to say a bit of a call for action. Do go and look at the new code. I've had a look at it. It is very, very interesting. We're actually really excited about this new move to a more streamlined and kind of, holistic approach. But if you do want to have a chat with me or anyone at the Chartered Institute of Fundraising about it, please do feel free to get in touch with me anytime. I've just popped my email in the chat. And of course, Conor's just put up their the Fundraising Regulator's contact details as well. And with that, everybody, just a big thank you to Conor for coming along and answering everybody's questions. And have a lovely afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.